because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
This is Cows in the Field. It's a movie podcast. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we have a very special guest, a good friend of mine from back in the UC Davis days, Vishal Dave.
Man, how are you?
Hey, welcome, man. All right, so you suggested Children of Men, and this is a movie that I think we should just come out and say it right now. This movie rules. This movie straight up rules. I was like, man, this movie holds up. Watching this movie was great, and I'm just curious. Was there anything in particular that excited you about watching this movie and talking about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, just personally, like I love sort of the gritty sci-fi, so to speak. I don't know what the sort of the best term for this, but sci-fi that just changes one thing, but doesn't sort of fundamentally. It's not about lasers or spaceships and stuff, but it just sort of changes a premise and then sees what kind of the social ramifications of the premise are. Right now, this is like famously done by like Asimov and other folks who are just sort of like, well, we're just going to tweak this one thing and then see what happens within it. And so I just thought it was interesting. It was a movie that's always stuck with me because it's just a genre that I sort of naturally really dig. And I'm also just sort of like, I love the like person on a mission of no return, whether you know it or not, that they're not going to return, right? So like Danny Boyle's Sunshine is also a film that I really like. Just this idea of like the hero that, may or may not return. You sort of over the course of the picture realize that they're not going to return.
Yeah, that's a good genre. I like that. What are some other examples of that? I'm just trying to think like...
I mean, Contact, which we've talked about on this podcast.
Yeah.
She keeps saying she might not come back. She does come back, but she says it a lot.
Does she even go?
That's unclear.
Have you seen Contact, Vishal?
Yes.
Yeah.
I listened to the podcast.
All right. We were excited about that one. Man on a Mission is a good genre. I like that genre a lot. And in a way, is Ad Astra kind of like that? Is 2001 a little bit like that? Interstellar is kind
Interstellar
of that,
for
right?
sure.
Interstellar for sure. Gattaca.
Oh, I haven't rewatched Gattaca in a long time.
Gattaca's really good.
We should do Gattaca.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it says about me that I like this. Like you're going to go somewhere and never return. But it's a genre that I think plays well into a lot of this style of sci-fi. I think really plays well into that sort of narrative arc. Right?
Well, it's super heroic. I mean, it's in a way the ultimate form of heroism, right? Of self-sacrifice for the greater good. You will not get to partake in that greater good by definition because you are about to sacrifice yourself. And they are doing it premised entirely on there being something after that they're doing it for, right? That they're doing it for these people who will come after them. And I think that's like a crucial assumption. And that assumption, I mean, in the beginning of this movie is overturned, right? Because this is this is the last generation on Earth. But it is interesting that then Theo, when he learns about Key and her baby, suddenly has a new sort of reason to live, and he ultimately decides to sacrifice himself for her well-being, for the hope that there is more to come. So wait, I'm not sure if we're not sure if we saw this movie together for the first time, but at least I don't know if I saw it in theaters. Actually, do you know if you saw it in theaters?
Oh yeah, I saw it in theaters.
Okay.
This was like, again, I was on this one. I was like, yeah, I can't wait to see this. I've been watching, I've been sort of following Cuarón's work for a while and stuff like that. So I was like, I was into this, right? But yeah, I saw it in the theaters. I can't remember if I saw it with you, but I remember walking out feeling, pretty like, man, that was a bummer. Like it was just like, it was awesome, but it was a bummer. Right?
Yeah. What did you feel about watching it this time?
Pace. I started it pretty late last night. So I was sort of like, oh man, like, am I going to get through this? I'm going to have to watch this in the morning. Like, what am I going to do here? And stuff like that. And I just was glued. I was just glued, and it felt like it was over in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It felt like a lot, like it had this pace to it where it was sort of, some of it's the steady cam shots, the documentary feel, like, some of that, it just felt like I was watching something unfolding in real time.
Yep.
And we can talk about the context of like this in today's world, right?
Yeah.
And so it just sort of felt like when I watched it in 2006, I felt like I was watching this sort of perverse dystopia of like what the world could be. And when I was watching it last night, I was like, yeah, this sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
at least in the sense of like, it didn't strike me as it struck me less as fiction, right?
Yep.
Which was like sort of, not that I like think that like, whatever, like we're on that verge or anything, but it just sort of like the bizarreness of it, like what I felt the first time I saw it, in 2006. It just felt less strange to me. And maybe that's just because I've seen it a couple times now. And so
Yeah.
just sort of like I kind of know it's coming. But the context,
Yep.
the visions of London, all of that, sort of the social unrest and stuff like that, all of it just seemed like, because that's stuff that we're all sort of grappling with on a daily basis today.
Yeah, I mean, it's in particular the immigration situation that is at the forefront of this movie. And I watched an interview with Cuarón, it was filmed 2 years ago, I think, and they were like, yeah, so you kind of nailed like a bunch of the major issues that were going to happen, and he was like, yeah, like it seemed obvious to me at the time.
I'm sure it's no joy to you to discover how clairvoyant that film was, because here we are 12 years later, and the immigration crisis and the climate chaos that we now have right around us was there in that film.
Yeah, but there were people were warning about that for decades now.
Yeah, but very few people were listening.
Yeah, but it was not a topic trend, I guess.
Yes.
And what is amazing is that now everybody, even people sending children, oh, look at that. I was just, these people were talking about that like 2 decades ago, and now it's happening. All of these things that we're living it was completely predicted 2 decades ago.
Yep.
Immigration, environment, this whole thing of the populism and authoritarian states. I mean, this is reality. Really, there are no news.
Yeah, the things that jumped out to me this time were, I think, in particular the immigration thing, but I mean, he was working with transposing images from like Guantanamo Bay and the Iraq War. Like this really feels like
anytime there's a bag put on somebody's head.
Yeah. I mean, and the scene in Bexhill when there's the uprising, right? Those are shots that are, I think, explicitly designed to mimic the feel of the footage that we were getting out of Iraq in that time. And so that's it was in a way like weirdly like bringing me back to that time. And yet like that kind of footage, now we have a whole nother context for it, because you have, the Arab Spring, and then you have Occupy Wall Street. Yeah, you have Occupy, and then you have Black Lives Matter protests now, and like the current clashes with the police. And it just is, it's like our whole lives are now suffused with these images on a daily basis. And I think, this movie was, what feels, I think, so prescient about it is that it was, shooting that stuff in that kind of documentary style that is now, we all have cell phone footage that is getting us the same looking footage where people are, it's kind of grainy and it's all shaky and people are kind of running around. And one of the things that Cuarón loves to do with Lubezki, his cinematographer, is stick the camera right in the middle of the action, right? He doesn't like the wide establishing shot that much. He likes the shot where the camera's in the middle and it has to move around. And this is like, I think, nowhere clearer than in that extended car scene where the camera's affixed to the top of the ceiling of the car and it's moving around. But he does it all the time. Anytime he can put a camera in the middle of a crowd and have to physically move the camera to get your experience of what's happening, he wants to do that. And that is the shots we're getting now, right? From, in particular, today, like from like the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Another thing I thought about a little bit while we were watching the movie is how kind of pointless and futile capitalism would be in this construct, but how I would expect human beings not to just sort of give it up, right? And maybe this will touch a little bit on sort of when we talk about legacy or kind of why we do the things we do, but in a world in which this is the last generation, right? And like a lot of capitalism is around like sort of aggregating generational wealth, right? And then either putting it to philanthropic uses or something, but the first step is always accumulation, right? You never just sort of say, oh, I'm just going to get enough for what I need for my lifetime, right? You're always sort of like, well, for my kids and for my legacy, whatever, right? But like, how futile would capitalism be in this sense, right? Like, I can see a world in which if this was the last generation, like hyper capitalism would kick in, right? People are just like, let's just spend every dollar we have because there's nothing left, right? But I can also see people who are just sort of still holding on to like all this like generational wealth, even though there's never going to be another generation, right?
Yeah.
So it struck me particularly when I think it's his cousin or the
Yep.
person who goes to see with like the, with like the statues and all the great art, and obviously clearly lives in this like bubble that they created, right,
Yeah.
within like Greater London and stuff. I'm like, gosh, what's the point of this, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's no generation coming, right? Like,
I was thinking a little bit about that too, because I was wondering, what's the more likely situation to happen in a situation where we know that this is the last generation. Okay, so one thought is, and I think you articulated both thoughts, so just to put them out there again. So one is like, we realize, we have like now an abundance of natural resources because we don't need to hoard. Like let's use all the resources we have. Let's just use them up.
Burn all that fossil
Burn
fuel.
the fossil fuels, right? Like use up the medical supplies. There's no need to hold on to them. Like, let's get it. Okay, the other one though, the other impetus is hoard. Here's the reason behind hoarding. There's no generation coming up to take care of us. Right. So we, in our current, the way we he lived our lives for basically the eternity is we get old and then we are unable to actually produce any goods, and we become in need of being taken care of by the younger generation. And so in a world where there's like no younger generation, there's no farmers, there's going to be no farmers, there's going to be no people able to, move the goods around. Maybe that would just lead to hoarding, right? Because people will just be like, well, I got my thing.
You got to be self-sufficient at the end.
Yeah, nobody's going to be making bread.
Yikes.
So I got to hold on to this because I want to be able to last. And so maybe that would happen. And that the movie kind of I think leans in that direction, right? That's what I think is potentially what's responsible for all this social unrest, is that people are just like, oh crap, like we all now got to get what resources were produced because there's not going to be any more production. So I do wonder, I'm not sure like which is more likely, but I do think it's interesting that they have you could think of it in two ways.
I don't know if all the pandemic hoarding is any indication. I think the hoarding seems likely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's right. I think that's sort of what struck me as so weird, right? Sort of, it seemed like at least with the pandemic hoarding, you think, well, okay, there's this like temporary, there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's something that I'm trying to I'm just waiting out, right? Like I'm stocking up and I'm waiting it out, and I'm going to come out of the bunker and it's going to be fine. But in this world, as far as they know, there is no coming out of the bunker. Right?
There's no coming out.
But there clearly was hoarding, right? I mean, there's this bubble, and like there were people inside the bubble, and people who had all kinds of stuff that other folks didn't have, right? So, but yeah, no, it was just a really interesting sort of context to watch the movie in. Right?
Totally, yeah. And so thinking about the last generation situation, there's some philosophical work that's been done on this, and in particular, a book by Samuel Scheffler called Death and the Afterlife. And by afterlife, he doesn't mean the personal afterlife. That is the afterlife that you and me might end up in if we die. But rather the afterlife of just other people living on beyond our death. He calls it the collective afterlife. And so, one thing that the movie posits is that a lot of things that in fact do matter to us, like our jobs, our appreciation maybe of art, or a lot of the projects that we engage in, might actually matter less in a world where there is this infertility scenario. That is, in a world where we are the last generation of humans. I'm just curious, before we get into the philosophical part of this, like, do you share that sentiment that, I mean, I think is part baked into the movie, and Scheffler thinks is accurate, that in fact a lot of these things would matter a lot less in that scenario? Like, would you feel any reason to continue your job?
Putting aside, I think for the purposes of this exercise, putting aside the like, you still need to eat and produce income to like live, right? So just sort of like, if you thought about your legacy, right, in terms of like what projects you would.
Yeah.
I mean, so I came to this idea, kind of as you guys sort of, as we were thinking about doing this episode, and I kind of agree with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What so much of what. Just take maybe a silly example, sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would sports continue in the world of children and men?
That's a good question.
Would they continue? Would they matter?
Yeah.
Because putting aside again, like, you want to get wealthy from playing sports or whatever,
yeah.
but why do people play sports, right? Because they want this like legacy to exist. Like, I scored the most points. I scored, like Michael Jordan wanted to win the most championships, right? Something like that. But would Michael Jordan even care? Like, what was he being? Maybe he would, maybe because he's just psychotic.
Michael Jordan might care, but others might not.
You're right. Michael Jordan would definitely care. He would still want to destroy everyone and everything he did. Just for the moment of living it, but what would it matter? I don't like why would people play sports? Why would you watch sports?
Yeah, I mean, and here's a couple other examples. So take like the project. There's a lot of people right now who are actively trying to cure cancer.
Yeah.
Would it matter anymore if they found that cure? You might think maybe the cure isn't coming in their lifetime, but they we're building towards it, and now there's not going to be any people left, so maybe it would matter a lot less if we actually cured cancer. Or take all the work that's being done in Silicon Valley right now. Yeah. So would any of that matter? I mean, you might think it's all just for connecting humans, and if we're the last generation, you might think it shouldn't matter at all, really, or very little. Laura, what do you think?
I don't know. It's hard to me to know how I'd feel about my professional work of raising money. I feel like philanthropy is pressingly important for now, but also the way that I always talked about it, because I worked in higher education, was about the next generation. That's how we always framed it for pitch for philanthropy. But on a personal level too, I think if I were not able to have children of my own, that's something that I always wanted in my life. That would be really, really hard on a personal level, aside from whatever professional projects I had going on. I would find it really hard to get through life, I think, knowing that would be just something that I'm not going to be able to take part in.
I mean, that would be tough. I mean, I know,
sorry to bum you out.
No, I mean, well, I mean, it'd be harder on you than me. I mean, another aspect of it is creative work. Would I don't know how would we think it matters to make this podcast? Would you think we'd matter to write stories?
It's not clear why we make this podcast.
No, who knows? But presumably we do it for someone to listen to. Maybe it's ourselves. But anyway, that, or making art, paintings and things. Would it matter to do those things?
Isn't this where people talk about you have to love the process?
Well,
right? Wouldn't that be the ultimate test of that sort of thing that I hear from artists all the time about you can't think about the fame, you can't think about making it, quote unquote, whatever your definition of success is. You have to love the process, and everything else is just a byproduct of that, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you do still record this podcast because you like talking about movies. Right?
I like that thought.
Yeah.
I like that thought, Vishal. Well, hold on. We'll come back to that. So suppose it does matter less for a moment, just because a really interesting consequence follows from this. We'll come back to your process thought in a second, because I think that I actually totally agree with that. So one consequence of this is that so consider something we do know that is true of us. Unfortunately, we are all going to die. Everyone we know will die. But this thought doesn't have the same effect at all on us. Notice that, just reflecting on that, it's not like we go, oh man, why are we doing anything? Why are we engaging in sports? Why are we? It doesn't bother us at all. We, in a way, we always knew it. It's there before our minds. Not all the time, but when we reflect on it, we're like, yeah, of course. So what Scheffler thinks is that shows in a certain sense that the persistence of humankind matters more to us than our own continued existence and the continued existence of our friends and immediate family. And that is really surprising because it suggests that, think about the persistence of humankind. That means we care more that there be people who do not currently exist and may not even have any determinate identities. They're just they're not even we can't even imagine who they would be, but we care more that they will exist than that we will exist a little longer or something like that we would continue to exist, which is really surprising. And that's just, he's following through the train of thought from thinking well, look, if you think that the Children of Men scenario would seriously undermine the value of a lot of your projects, and you don't think that's the case about just the fact that we're all going to die, that does suggest in some sense that you think it matters more that the human race continues. Now, Scheffler wants to try to diagnose this, and he says that maybe the reason that is the case is that valuing is something we can only do in a social context. And all right, so I'm curious about what you think of this. Here's a thought experiment. I ran this by Laura already, so I already know what her view is, but you should still tell us, Laura.
Okay.
Okay, so suppose you had to choose between the following two options. Okay, option one is that you will die, let's say, relatively recently, like you'll die like in a few days, but you know that humanity will just survive long after your death. So that's option one. Option two is you will live out your regular lifespan, but humanity will die in a couple days. Like everyone else will die. So you'll be the only person left on Earth for the remainder of your years, but you'll have a long life ahead of you. Question: which of these two options would you prefer?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking Laura.
Okay.
I want to ask. Well, Laura has a strong opinion.
Oh my God,
about
I'm
this.
taking that quietus like right away. Absolutely not. I am not going to be alone by like
So
a
you
life by
prefer to
myself.
die and let humanity.
That's what I'm saying.
go
I'm
on.
taking the quietus. I'm going
Laura's
to,
option one.
I'm going to sleep. I'm going to die and the humanity can move on without me.
Vishal, do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, you should have asked me this question 10 years ago, but today, I think I'm with Laura, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've got a kid, right? I think about legacy more than ever before, right?
Mhm.
It's sort of like legacy has been, become, whether I cared about it or not, has become such a central focus of my life in all kinds of ways, right? Like, thinking about whatever, your child's going to need in the future, how you can be helpful, setting them up for success, whatever, you're thinking about that and, sort of, and then wanting to be there for their milestones, right? So like wanting to take care of yourself in a way that like is for their milestones. So yeah, I don't know that I could. Yeah, I mean, like, what's the point of just like living up this like life by yourself?
So that's a really good way of putting it, Vishal. So that's what Scheffler wants you to think. So Scheffler thinks that this shows to a certain extent that valuing is only possible in the social context. The whole what is the point of just living out a solitary life like this is that it would be a life without value or largely devoid of any value. It would be an insignificant, largely meaningless life.
But do you not agree with that, Jess? Are you happy to just philosophize by yourself?
Well,
just read books by yourself in a library all day.
So yeah, I do lean towards that view.
I think you're sounds good.
So Scheffler thinks the view that I just articulated, which is I choose to live rather than die. And sorry guys, I would let you all die.
Nobody is surprised.
He thinks that's like the egoist view, right? That's the view, which is you're completely egoistic. But I want to try to actually argue the exact opposite. Well, not exact opposite, but a close to exact opposite.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Okay, so this gets back to Vishal's thought about the process. So I think that my view is that the prospect that we're the last generation would pretty much undermine almost none of the value of almost anything that I do. So in particular, I think all of our accomplishments would still be valuable. So Michael Jordan scoring 60 points would still be an accomplishment. It would still be a valuable accomplishment. It would still be, I think, incredibly important. I think all creative work would still have much the value that it does, because the value in the creative work doesn't lie in its being appreciated by later generations, but just by the fact that it exists. I think the fact that David exists, it's an incredible, majestic, beautiful statue that took a lot of care and work to put in, and it expressed, an immense amount of emotional power and everything. And that's enough. I think the fact that it's enjoyed is great, but its value drives, I think, intrinsically from what it is. I think also that this thought that our work and the value of our projects derives from future generations participating in them and taking something away from it is itself a kind of egotism. It's itself this idea that I want to do this because I'll be remembered, because someone else will see my name by the accomplishment that I got. And I think insofar as it is egotism, and I have that attitude, which I do to some extent, I feel like it's an attitude that I should try to get rid of. It's an attitude I should be attempting to remove from myself as best as possible, to exercise from my mind. And I think this really does tell in favor of that thought you had about process, Vishal. And I think that I'm trying to articulate what the process, like what the value in the process is. It's not just process, but it's just that the value, I think, of a lot of what we do drives intrinsically. And of course, there's lots of stuff that drives extrinsically. Like, of course, there wouldn't be any friendship in this world because there are no people to be friends with one another. And so those values would be gone. But I think that there still would be friendship in a world where we're the last generation, because I could still be friends with you guys, and I could still be kind to you, and those things are valuable. And I don't think they lose value just because there's not going to be anyone coming after us who isn't friendly or whatever.
Mhm.
That's my counterpoint to Scheffler and the Children of Men. Yeah,
it's a good point. It's actually a really good point about the egotism. That was well played. Like that's interesting. I want to double click though a little bit on this value point, right?
Yeah.
Sort of, because I was really with you when you were saying sort of, the value is derived by, like, in relation to, I think a lot about sort of like Sapiens, right? The book by Yuval Harari, right? That just all of humankind is largely just like shared acknowledgement, right? Like we think gold is valuable because we all just agreed that gold is valuable.
Right.
We think
Mhm.
we think art is valuable because we all agree that it's hard to make. We just agree that it's hard to make, right? We think Michael Jordan's accomplishments are valuable because we think it's hard to put a basketball into a hoop at such a consistent rate, right?
Mhm.
Something like that. But like, there's no intrinsic value in being able to do that, right? Like, there's no intrinsic value to gold. There's no intrinsic value
that's
to
true.
anything, right? So
Yeah.
so help me understand that a little bit in your context of this, like, because I was with you on that point, right? Of value is derived from what we all agree is valuable, right? And that makes the economist in me makes perfect sense, right? That's so good. So in your scenario of where you're sort of just extinguishing this egotism by not really being focused on legacy, but just going back to the thought experiment of deciding to be the last person on Earth, what would value look like in that context? Just that, like, Michael Jordan had scored the points, that you had read the books, that you had written the paper. Like, what's the
Good.
there's no one to even there's no one to even contextualize that value for you, right? It's just you sort of thinking it might be valuable, right?
Right. So I think we should distinguish two things. So there's one which is like sort of commodity value, which is like what can I get with this by trading and that kind of thing. And then that definitely derives from some shared consensus about what the exchange rate is. And then I think there's other kinds of value, which philosophers sometimes call intrinsic value, which is just the things that are valuable in and of themselves, not because they're desired or useful for trading for other purposes, but the things that are just there, objects of value in and of themselves. And I think things that are beautiful have those properties, and I think things that are difficult can be valuable in that way.
We think something's beautiful. Why do we think a mountain is beautiful? It's not objectively beautiful, right? We just all agree that, like, this vista looks nice.
I was thinking that some things like that are objectively beautiful, and
aliens, when they come down and they look at the mountain, they're like, you know what, this is really ugly. Where I come from, I love flat.
They might not be able to appreciate the beauty, but it might still be there. Here's one way to test whether you are on board with this or thought or not. So just imagine a world where Michelangelo completes the David, and then it's sort of boarded up and never witnessed ever again. But it took a long time to carve. It was complicated, and it expressed a certain aesthetic ideal that I think we do find valuable. But now just suppose nobody sees it. And nobody is ever in a position to compare it to other statues and that kind of thing. And just compare that to a world where Michelangelo never did that, right? He just spent his days just twiddling his thumbs. I think the world in which he does do it is a better world, even though nobody is around to sort of appreciate that. And that, I think, is just because it is just intrinsically valuable for him to have done this thing.
So when Steph Curry hits 5 3-pointers from half court in practice before anyone shows up.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. He just goes to the court and he hits the 5 half court shots. And sometimes the coach is there, sometimes the coach isn't even there, but he hits them, and we know that he hits them, and he tells us that he never leaves the court till he hits 5 of them in a row or something like that. Right. It doesn't matter. It's just the fact that he can do that is valuable, right?
Yeah.
He's like, who cares if anyone saw him do that, or if he did it in a game, or if he did it for some sort of document, something that's being documented, right? Like it's just Steph Curry can hit 5 3-pointers from mid-court, and what a world we live in, right?
That's the thought. If you think of it like, so that's all talking about aesthetic value, but think of it for moral value too. So you might have, I think that we at least know of the concept of a character of someone who does a lot of good, but then isn't recognized for that good that they've done, right? And in fact, they don't do it because they want to be recognized. They just do the good. They're just like, no, this is the right thing to do. I'm trying to just be friendly and that sort of thing. And then they die and nobody knows that they did those things and they're forgotten to the sands of time. Now, that person might be like, this kind of sucks for me because I didn't get any recognition. Sure, I understand that, but I was thinking it's still good that they did it. It's not that the goodness only derives from it being appreciated by other people, that they did those things. Yeah, that's the thought on the moral level. But we were talking about it on the aesthetic level, and there are other virtues too, right? Having knowledge is a virtue, and I think that can be pursued solo. You don't need other people around you to share that knowledge with. It's often helpful, and sometimes maybe necessary for certain projects that these be joint endeavors. But I think getting the truth and knowing it, scientific discoveries, philosophical discoveries, mathematical discoveries, and so on, are valuable just because they are, finding the truth. So that's the view that I have, and I think it's interesting to me that it plays so strongly against the intuition Scheffler has. About what it takes for something to be valuable, which is going along with what you're suggesting, Vishal. But it really requires this social context. It's not entirely clear to me what Scheffler means by the social context, or if he means something like what you have in mind, or if he means something just like that there be an ongoing presence of humanity to sort of engage with the thing. And what the reason I was interested in this is because I love Children of Men. It's one of my favorite movies. It's a fantastic movie. But I was never moved by the central premise. And I always wondered why I wasn't moved by it. I think a lot of people see this movie as incredibly bleak. And of course, it's bleak because of all the war and tragedy that's happening. But on top of it, it's, I think, supposed to be bleak because there's no hope for humanity. And I guess I was never moved by that thought. And I was trying to figure out why. And I think this exercise in engaging with Scheffler's book has been helpful because it helped me sort of, like, reading it. I remember I was telling Laura, I was reading this book thinking, it's like I'm reading an alien describing feelings I've never felt before.
Just like feelings though? Is that like the first?
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. Yeah, they were saying these words like happy and sad.
And like care for humanity. You're like, what? I undercut you a little bit.
I just have this vision of Justin like listening to like Radiohead in a library by himself.
Forevermore.
Like, computer on repeat as he just like reads all the books that there are to read.
Yeah, that's what I would do. I would be in a weird way. I feel like I could get on just fine. I mean,
you were like, listen, I can watch everything on the Criterion Channel in peace.
Can I give one other argument against the Schefflerian / Cuarón?
You got an axe to grind.
Well, okay, so. Vishal, do you know this scene in Annie Hall where Woody Allen, it's like a flashback and he's like with his mom and his mom's like taking him to, I don't know, a therapist or the doctor or something. And she's like, he doesn't want to do anything.
Why are you depressed, Alvy?
Tell Dr. Flicker. It's something he read.
Something you read, huh?
The universe is expanding.
The universe is expanding?
Well, the universe is everything, and if it's expanding, someday it will break apart, and that will be the end of everything.
What is that your business? He stopped doing his homework.
What's the point?
What has the universe got to do with it? You're here in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is not expanding.
It won't be expanding for billions of years yet, Alvy. And we've got to try and enjoy ourselves while we're here, huh?
Many of us would think Alvy Singer, this is a stupid idea, right? The fact that the universe is going to die, or the fact that there are going to be no humans in like millions of years, is not that doesn't undercut any of the value of being a good person today, here and now. or engaging in cancer research or whatever.
Doing your homework.
Doing your
in
homework.
the case of Alfie Singer.
Yeah. But if you think about what's the difference between, let's say humanity is going to be extinguished in 100,000 years and humanity is extinguished within 50 years. Well, it's only a difference of time, but it's the same circumstance. So if our attitude, like, why should our attitude towards one be different from our attitude towards the other? So that's a way of like getting from the thought that we shouldn't care about humanity being extinguished in X number of years to we shouldn't care about humanity being extinguished in X minus blank number of years. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, but horizons matter to people, right? Like time horizons matter, right? Like we do think 1,000 years matters to how people invest today, right? In terms of like what they do, right? So I think you're right. Logically, if you don't think it matters in 100,000 years, then it shouldn't matter in 100 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the logically consistent position, right? It's just also not how human beings think.
That's right. No, totally. Yeah. So the argument is not that you will be moved by this, but that you ought to be moved by this. So if you have this reaction, then if you have one reaction to the near-term extinction and one reaction and a different reaction to the long-term extinction, then you're being inconsistent in a certain way. So that's that. So it's an argument that you should somehow try to get over that feeling. Or maybe you should just realize, it wasn't actually as bad as I thought. That's my view.
I think the Silicon Valley people that just divert to them would just say that like, oh no, man, we got to build a time capsule for the aliens, right? Like they would immediately say like, no, we have to continue to build Google because the aliens are going to come and they're going to know how smart we were, right?
That's super.
We're going to give them instructions to like recreate us, right? We're going to leave some like DNA and like, recreate us. And, like,
that's like the extreme Schefflerian idea, right? Like it's not even just humans that we care about existing. It's like, well, maybe there are other beings, and we need to like,
aliens,
we need to be.
Worlds,
we need dimensions. them to. We want them to remember us.
We want them to want to hang out with us.
They better know that Steph Curry hit those 5 half-court shots.
Yeah.
No, even better. We're going to leave a little piece of Steph Curry's DNA behind, so they're going to
reincarnate him, AI style.
We'll give them the instructions to recreate Steph Curry. Right?
Oh my God! Would you want to be
entire race of Steve Currys?
Is it Steve Curry's?
yeah, right. I'm just imagining you take Steve Curry's DNA. So
I like that you call him Steve Curry.
That was Steve Curry. Oh my God!
Because we were watching the Jordan doc, and so there was a lot of Steve Kerr.
Yeah,
so I think
that's generous of you. That's what's happening. It's not a sleep deprivation in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. It's logically inconsistent to not care about.
Well, that's the argument. I mean, I don't know if it's right, but that's at least the argument. And Scheffler has, interestingly, so that argument was raised by Susan Wolf in response to Scheffler's book, and so this book is like where these lectures, I forget if they were Oxford or whatever, and then they invited, as part of the publication of the book, a bunch of philosophers to respond, and Susan. So I have to give credit that was Susan Wolf's objection, and Scheffler has a response to that. So it's not like this is settled.
Well, how do you think this point of view plays out in the sort of the factions in the movie, right? So you have
yes, good.
You don't have so you have the Human Project, right? You have the Fishers, which by the way, do we know why they're called the Fishers? Maybe that was a detail that I missed in the movie, but
they don't say it. They don't explain it.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah, because I was just like, why are they called the Fishers? Is this some like historical reference that I'm missing? But
no, it might be in the novel, maybe.
I have a hypothesis. It might be in the novel. My hypothesis is that they are pro-immigration, and if you sort of think about what a fish is, it's sort of a thing that like does a lot of migrating. I mean, maybe they could have been called birds too, but fish, they just like they float around, especially in the ocean. They're always like floating free. So maybe it's
especially in the ocean.
Yeah, in the aquarium. They can't do very much immigrating.
I see that. That was the distinction you were making. I was like,
it could be in the lake.
Fish.
It could be lake fish. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that one makes sense to me. I don't know. I buy that as fish. Anywho, sorry, Vishal, you were breaking down the various factions. There's Human Project. There's the Fishers,
yeah, and there's the I don't know what the government, the status quo, whatever you want to call it.
The
right?
man.
So like, how are all three of them? Because you're right. So why would a government care about enforcing anything if it was sort of like, yep, this is all gonna go up and, like, it'd be interesting to take this lens and see what each of those factions would say about it. Because one of the interesting things I thought about in the movie is it's actually pretty like light on dialogue.
Yeah.
Right. It's very light on exposition also, right? There's not a whole lot of explaining to you what's happening. There's a lot of just like, we're, again, that documentary feel of like, we're just watching these events unfold. There's not a lot of context for how the world got, like, you don't know why the world got to be that way. Like, they're not building any sort of mythology, right? There's no sequel coming. There's no prequel. There's no franchise, right?
Mhm.
There's no origin to discuss here, right? It's just the problem and the through line of the problem, right? So it's interesting, and I think it actually works to great effect here, because I think it just leaves you wanting more. You're so fascinated by it. I think it creates the mystery and kind of makes you really just like, man, like, I have so many questions, and like, some of them are really obvious, and some of them are sort of more philosophical, like what we've been discussing. But through this lens, what do you think like all of these factions think about what is happening, right? Because they're cracking down on something, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, presumably immigration or whatever. Maybe it's just a resource game, something like that. But the Human Project, like, they're doing something, but they never tell you what it is. Like, what would the Fishers have done differently with the baby that the Human Project isn't going to? Because at the end, you get to the point where you hear that, okay, you're there, the boat's there, the Human Project's here, yay. No one tells you the Human Project's good. No one tells you what's going to happen to Key and her baby, right? Like, maybe they're going to dissect the baby to try to like do the alien like DNA recreation thing, right? And they don't tell you it. Similarly, they don't tell you what the Fishers are. They end up being sort of these like radicals that like you're not supposed to align with, but they never tell you why, right? They never tell you. So what do we hypothesize? Like, what do we think these factions are doing? Like, Theo's just clearly, he gets personally invested and he's like moving towards this thing, but why? Like, what is the Human Project, right? Like,
what I think is so interesting is, so there's the two storylines intersecting here, because there's there's the government immigration issue, and then there's the like, there are no babies issue. And then, so the fish like are, they're divided on how to deal with this, right?
Now, we all agreed to deliver Key to our brothers and sisters in the Human Project.
Right.
But now we've got to reevaluate that position.
No, there's no need. We move forward with the original plan.
Yes! Hey, she'll never make it. The police are looking for her.
We can find a way. It's what Julian wanted.
We'd be risking the girl's life.
Listen. She belongs here. And this baby is the flag that could unite
We
us
said
all.
we'd never use this baby for political purposes.
My baby is not a flag.
Make it public!
What?
Excuse me?
You should make it public.
Well, you saw the telly. She's about to be very public.
Doesn't matter. She's pregnant.
Oh, right. And then the government will say, well, we were wrong. Fuji's are humans too.
Yeah, well, whatever's going on, whatever your political ideas are, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter.
Oh, come on.
She needs a doctor.
You really don't
Look,
get it.
the government will take the baby and parade a posh black English lady as the mother.
Nobody's taking my baby.
We all know this government would never acknowledge the first human birth in 18 years from a Fuji.
A wanted Fuji. Why don't we explain to Mr. Fan what they do to immigrants in this country?
He knows. He's seen the cages. He's not that stupid.
I'm not going to the government. You told me you would get me to the Human Project. You promised me.
And what I was struck watching it this time in that discussion was it's that same contrast you see among the left today, right? You see this sort of like optimistic in a way, what sometimes are thought of as like the middle left, right? Who are just like, no, we can play the game largely as it's been played and work for incremental change. And then there's the more radical left who wants to embrace a more radical, pro-democratic socialist agenda or whatever, even more radical than that. I mean, you're seeing now with like abolish police movements and that kind of thing, which is like, no, the only way, it's like reform isn't going to do it, right? We need to just like we need to start from scratch. And I thought it was interesting that same dynamic is playing out here, and that you've got, these idealists within the movement and then these cynics who are just like, no, like this is our end comes before everything, and we're going to have to fight to get that end. And as far as the government, we really don't see the government, right? It's hard to know like what they're up to. I mean, the only guy you see is Teddy, his cousin, and his cousin is just like this, he's just like completely closed himself off, right? Him and his son just take drugs, right? They just take the government issued like happy pills. And he's just like, I don't think about it. Like, I don't have to think about it because it's out there. And I'm going to just kind of live my cloistered life here and be apolitical, right? I don't have to take a side on this. And yeah, and I don't know what, I mean, like, I take it the government is just interested in preserving the status quo, right? Preserving Britain's, I don't know, resources or whatever. But for what end? As you're right, you know, like they have more than they need.
Right. The video that he's watching in the Munibus or whatever, right, is just sort of like the world is collapsing or whatever. It's the Britain soldiers on, right? Just like patriotic message.
Yeah.
Like, soldiers on to what end?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
What are you soldiering on to, right? And why would you feel patriotic about that in this context? Right?
Yes, that's a great point. Yeah, exactly. Is that something to be feel good about? Oh my god.
I don't know. I mean, that's like maybe the essence of nation states, like just always striving for dominance
and their continued existence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like we want Britain to continue to exist, even when there are no people left. Britain will be the last.
Britain's the last. And we got the David, and we got all the stuff.
Man,
I wonder, there's a scene where Theo wakes up and there's like a big red sun. He wakes up early in the morning, and I was wondering if that was a reference to like the great empire of Britain. You know, the sun never sets on.
Oh, interesting.
Because it feels like they've gone back to the old colonial impulses now that everything is like falling apart. They're, you know, pilfering all of the resources and like the national treasures of all the places that have fallen. It feels very much, and even just like the scene, like even just the imagery of like sort of like exotic like animals, like a camel and a zebra just hanging out on the green outside Buckingham House feels like colonial to me.
Oh yeah.
There's an animal arc and there's an art arc.
Well, so about the art though, Laura. So Laura knows more about art than I do. So I was asking a lot of questions about art throughout this movie. I'm like, what's that? What's that painting?
Yeah,
I was like, what's that statue with the guy with the
there was like
naked guy?
Oh my god, there was like a bunch of paintings when Theo first walks in, and they're so small on the screen, and they're just like some Renaissance paintings. Justin's like, do you know that painting? I don't know every painting in the whole world. Come on,
I'm like, what's that one? What's that one?
So, right here.
Okay, but okay. So tell us though a bit about some of the paintings. I mean, so there's
actually, I mean, there's one painting.
There's one painting
and one
but they
statue.
talk about a couple other paintings.
They do. I mean, I think there's really sorry.
The Picasso, the one painting.
The Guernica,
yeah, the Guernica. Yeah. They do throw out like a bunch of different references. They talk about Velázquez because they're talking about like specifically there was a bunch of Spanish artists because I think they like had, you know, successfully done a run on Madrid and put a bunch of stuff from the Prado.
Couldn't save La Pietà. Smashed up before we got there. Pretty rummy, huh?
My mum had a plastic one in the bathroom. It was a lamp.
Good to see you, Theo.
We got to keep Las Meninas and a few other Velasquez, but we only got a hold of 2 Goyas. That thing in Madrid was a real blow to art.
Not to mention people. How's Martha?
She's doing her animal charity thing. Sense of love.
Give her my best.
I think the 3 most important works of art in this movie, because they are referenced more than once or they come up more than once or they're like really visually striking, are the David, Picasso's Guernica, which is the scene of war that's in the dining room behind Theo in the dinner scene, and the Pietà, which you actually never see Michelangelo's Pietà, but he references it. And then there's a couple of like visual. There's a personification of Pietà later in the movie.
Can you describe what?
Yeah,
what
so the Pietà means the pity. It's a Madonna holding her dead son Jesus in her arms. You know, he's an adult. It's like she's cradling him while on the ground. And in Guernica, there's actually there's a bunch of figures in Guernica. It's a city. It's an image of civilians, you know, suffering from a bombing, and there's a woman holding her child. It's a baby, I think, instead of a full grown person. But all the same, it's a visual reference in Picasso's painting to the Pietà. But the first thing that you see, so Theo walks in and sees Teddy, and you see that big David. And Teddy walks underneath it and he says, "We couldn't save the Pietà," is what he says. So he doesn't actually, I think he says like, "Oh, isn't it rummy?" I think he's just pointing to the David. But the first thing that he says is about the Pietà. And I was thinking about like why, you know, in a world where they have all of the art, there's a lot to choose from if you're Cuarón. So why pick like those particular works of art. I mean, one answer is like that they're just really visually stunning and easy to read quickly. Like, if you were to choose Mona Lisa, it's a small kind of like, it's a smaller painting. I think they were very conscious about like actually doing this to scale and making it actually look like the real work of art. So that's one reason. But why David and why Guernica? The David thing, I mean, my silly answer is that it's like kind of a visual gag in a couple of ways, or in one way in particular, in that like the joke with the David is that he has a small penis. and this is a world of infertility. And
right, that was the
yes.
we're like, wait a sec, what's the joke
what?
here?
Just because small penises are funny. No, because this is a world of infertility.
We all know that your fertility count is pegged to the size of your penis.
Listen,
that's how it works, right?
Wait, I think that rings true to me.
Yeah.
That seems the perfect like thing to have.
Yeah.
Right.
He's also like a symbol of young fecundity and youth that like is not ever to be seen ever
That's
again
right.
in this world.
It's that he's young, right? It's that he's young and he's small, right? He fells the giant, right? The Goliath or whatever.
Right. And that was the other thing I was thinking in regards to why the David and Guernica is that in both cases, there's sort of just a lack of awareness on the part of Teddy and the ministry of the context and the meaning of those two pieces and where and now like them collecting them and hoarding them for the end of days. David being a symbol of like the little man fighting the larger power. And, maybe Britain thinks because they're like a small country, they think they're the David, but they're the Goliath. Yeah. And there's just like a lack of awareness there. And then, just the juxtaposition of watching this beautiful dinner scene. They're having a multi-course meal and being served in front of a picture of the horrors of war. And it's literally the background.
Yeah.
They don't think about it.
Well,
just like Teddy says, I don't think about it.
The other thing I was struck by what you were saying about the in particular that there both of these in Pietà and in Guernica, there are these images of mothers holding their deceased children, and of course their children are killed by man. They're not just killed by earthquakes or whatever. They're killed by another human being. And that is also reflected in this contrast, right, between the thing we're fighting for, the thing we care about in this movie is the next generation, and yet we're killing the next generation, right? Yep. We're killing them off. And you get that contrast also when Theo goes into the building, it's being attacked to get Key's baby, and he brings her out, and they all stop fighting for a second, and there's this like moment of reverence when they all kind of, are like they're seeing their own child for the first time as the baby comes through. And then it's just broken instantly. And there's like a bomb goes off and they all just start shooting each other again. And that contrast of like, we're like, we have this moment of self-reflection and it doesn't amount to anything.
Stop! Cease fire! Cease firing!
Yeah, I mean, the movie opens on the assassination of the youngest person.
Yeah, good,
right?
Yes.
Right, because he wouldn't sign an autograph.
Great point.
Yeah, who wouldn't sign an autograph, and then they, it said like that's how you learn of the problem is baby Diego died, right? And you're thinking about why baby Diego might matter or not matter, but someone just
just killed him.
Killed him, yeah. So it's like, what are we doing here? Right?
Yeah.
Like, if anything, it's a pessimistic movie in that regard, and it shows maybe we don't deserve to live anymore as like humans. Maybe humans just don't deserve to just
God.
continue existing. I mean, it's sorry, just to come back to my original point, like we suck. I mean, as a whole, like humanity, it's like we're just like these massive overusers of resources, of natural resources, who
and we don't even cherish the thing that we're professing to value so much, right?
Yeah, like
perpetual existence of humanity. It's like, yeah, we're willing to like, take people's heads off when we need to, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about the art stuff?
Of course.
Just because.
Yeah, of course. Sorry.
No, but it relates to feeling of hope or hopelessness around humanity. But one of the things I was thinking about, or I noticed this time, was there are some Guernica images also in the cave area or the subterranean area where they're when they get in the boat and they're just about to get to the Tomorrow boat and Key is going to go to the Human Project, whatever that possibly means. It's really hard to see, but there's a woman with her arms straight up in the air, and that's the woman who's engulfed in flames in Guernica, and a head that looks a lot like the woman's head that's from the Pietà piece of Guernica.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm. So maybe Pietà comes up a couple of times in that sense, and that it's like in the painting in the dinner scene, there's then the woman that's cradling her child. It's like a real life Pietà, and then in the cave, and then they also talk about when Teddy says we couldn't save the Pietà, Theo says something like, "Oh, my mom had a Pietà lamp." And it's kind of a throwaway line, but I wondered about it. But I think like that's the evolution that or the way that we see the Pietà come back a couple of different times does kind of track with how Theo is thinking about humanity. And when he first sees something like a work of art or thinks about Pietà, he just thinks like it's lost all meaning. It's become iterated so many times, and now it's just like trash, like a lamp. He doesn't like find any value in it. And then when we see it again, it's the question of like, now the art has become larger than the piece itself. The iconography has become part of our like larger consciousness. Images like the Pietà, Guernica are sort of just like floating around in our brains. But in this case, now it's like a symbol of expression and also hope, because it's, perhaps the refugees have been painting this in their free time to sort of just for the process of it.
Yeah.
But it's also something that we see on the way out towards their escape for hope. And at that point, Theo has had a complete 180 in his feeling towards humanity and life.
It's so interesting. I mean, that was a fantastic observation. And when you mentioned that to me before, I was really taken back by that, because in a way, there's this doubling of commodification and reproduction that happens. And the first time you hear it, you're like, oh, it diminishes the art. That it was reproduced, that you had a reproduction, that it was commodified. It's supposed to be like, yeah, who cares? Like my mom had the Pietà lamp. Like, college kids have it in the dorm room. Like it's just insignificant. But then when you see it in this second context where it's used as a symbol of hope, or because they can't access it because freaking guys got it locked up in the palace. Then suddenly it's like, no, this is actually liberating it. It's a value to have it actually commodified. It
belongs to all of us.
It belongs to everyone. It's democratized. And I like that doubling, and that you get that two reactions to this not commodification, but there's two reactions to the reproduction.
Replication. Yeah.
Did you guys notice? Maybe everyone was already onto this, but did you notice this sort of just the string of animals that like Theo? Right?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
There's the cat, the dog.
Every animal that interacts with Theo kind of like wants something, like wants his attention, wants his love, right? Like, is it as simple as just sort of animals, supposedly mythologically can like sense good spirits, and they all just sort of gravitate towards Theo, and like that's the they think he's better before he even knows he's better, right?
So what about the idea that he is a shepherd, right? So because he is shepherding them to the boat of tomorrow or whatever, and so in a way, like the animals sort of look to him as someone who can, I don't know, like they're not all livestock, I guess, but
anyway. No, I like that though. I had read it the way you did, Vishal, that like they see a goodness in him that he's suppressing, but is there.
Because when I think about when I just gotten done watching the movie, and I thought, sometimes what I like to do when I think about movies is sort of like which images stay with you, right? Like what images that keep coming back to you. And there's a couple in this film that stuck with me. But the kitten kind of like crawling up and like clawing him and like crawling up his leg really stuck with me. And I don't know that it's a particularly important frame in the movie, but it's a frame that probably in the last 24 hours I've thought about just as much as the ship coming out, or the first time you see the baby, or that scene where everyone just sort of stops fighting for a minute as there's lots of images that stick with you in this film, but this kitten image kept sticking with me, and I sort of wanted to like understand. I didn't know what it was. I was like, why do I care about that image so much, right? Like it's the thing that I keep thinking about.
It is such a cool image. I mean, the image that always gives me goosebumps is when the bus pulls into Bexhill for the first time, and it's just going past the cages of people, and the lighting is so stark, and it's recalling all these like horrific images from like Abu Ghraib and all that, and it's just it's so disturbing and just out of place. Like it just feels because it's like, we were supposed to be in like London, like this is, or whatever, not London, but this is like just outside of London, and it's like, but it looks like it's this war ravaged torture center, and I find that just so disconcerting. That scene always kind of it really gets me.
It's a hard one.
The visuals, I think, line up a lot with like some of the photography you see at the U.S.-Mexico border these days, right? Sort of a lot of this just like going through a chain of people who are just sort of, in this sort of no person's land for some indeterminate amount of time. Right?
Yeah.
So, the prescience of the movie is definitely something that I was struck by yesterday in terms of just like, wow, this feels so of the moment, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah.
For me, the scene one of the images that stuck with me the longest was the abandoned and sort of grown over elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
Partially, I mean, I just think like grown over buildings that have just been like left into the wild are like upsetting and also like fascinating. There's like a whole series of these videos on YouTube where people just like go to abandoned malls. It seems crazy that land would not be used for something in this day and age, but like sometimes there are just malls that have just been abandoned, and it's just like there's like water and plants growing up next to like a food court. It's disturbing.
It is cool. I think it's cool, man. I'm just
like a deer running through a classroom. It's crazy. But no, though that image really, really stuck with me.
It's almost like one of those things where it's like, if you haven't been reflecting on what the gravity of this situation and that there are no children, that's one of those scenes where it really reminds you. It's like, there's not going to be, nobody's going to these schools, right?
Yeah.
And another thing that I was thinking about this time was, and of course, this is the case, but you don't really think about it. But of course, everyone is older. Everyone in the movie, every extra, every person is older. They're like our age or older. And it's like, it is interesting to just think like, you don't hear children's voices until the baby's born, but until the very end when it cuts to black and you just hear the children playing, right? That's the first time you've actually heard any children's voices.
It is strange because now, since we watched a lot of our movies with a baby monitor on, whenever there is a cry in the mix, in a sound mix, I like my shoulders go up towards my ears. I'm like, oh my God, is he awake? And they put baby cries in the mix all the time in every movie, like every background noise. There's like children or baby sounds. And it is weird that it would be completely absent from this world. That seems such a nice pause because the midwife Fish character has her time to just sort of talk about like what it was like when this started happening. And they just like looked ahead to 7 months and there's no more, there's no pregnancies and how strange that must have been.
You know what I was thinking about in that thing? I mean, I don't want to get apocalyptic here, but I was thinking of COVID. It's the same thing where people are like, oh, well, it'll be fine because this is only a temporary thing. And then, and then they're like, wait a sec, this could actually be going on for longer than we thought. And then, and then eventually it was just like, oh,
there are no pregnancies.
That's it.
Yep.
It's a game over. And not that we're going to end up in that situation, but it does feel like that, right? At first you just dismiss it. You're like, oh, okay, this isn't a big deal. And then you've got your second and third waves.
Oh, Jesus.
Sorry.
What?
Justin, come on. That doesn't all have to come back to COVID.
Sorry.
What do you think? Why do you think this isn't as celebrated in Cuarón's filmography?
That's a great question.
It's Y Tu Mamá También. It's Gravity, which, we can talk about Gravity. I personally did not like it very much.
No, we're not Gravity fans here either.
Yeah. So Gravity, Roma, which was good. I think I saw it at a weird point in my personal life. But people obviously very celebrated. I think maybe a little bit sort of controversy around theatrical release versus Netflix, whatever you want to talk about that. But this movie almost never gets discussed, right? Like his earlier films get discussed. Gravity gets discussed, and it's what he won, awards for. But this one just sort of gets overlooked, and I think I've heard people talk more about the fact that he's the director of one of the Harry Potter films.
It's true.
Children of Men. Like, how can that be? That seems insane. This to me is his best work. This to me is, I think, the 100% the best thing he's ever done.
I totally agree.
Yeah,
I totally agree. Well, just on the point about people not watching this movie. So I looked on the budget, and I looked at the budget to revenue ratio, and this movie cost $75 million to make, and it earned about $75 million, like total box office. Like, that sucks. Like that really sucks. And like I think a lot of people didn't see it and haven't seen it, as you're pointing out. And I think it's like I don't know why that is.
In terms of like just why like the general population hasn't seen it, I mean, it's a bummer.
Yeah, it's a bummer. Well,
it's a bummer, and it's like really technically showy, but not in a way that like if you don't really like pay attention to camera work, you would appreciate.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Because it was clearly a response to George Bush.
Yeah.
But I mean, if we're talking about legacies, has anyone's legacy like sort of outshined its evil than George W. Bush? Right? Who seems like a veritable like Peace Prize winner compared to I mean, like I think there's just it's a very interesting world, right? Like this was clearly like a response to George Bush, but the fact that it feels so relevant and so prescient for a Trump administration is sort of striking, right? It's like, to your point, Justin, it's like that wasn't even that bad.
I mean, right? It just feels that way, I guess. I mean, those felt like manageable bads, right? Those felt like things that we could, with enough protesting and with enough hope, we could elect Barack Obama, right? Yeah. And this, where we're looking at, it feels a lot more bleak, right? It's
also George Bush's world felt very like still centered on foreign policy. This is like domestic strife,
That's
right?
True.
This is like COVID is here. Like this is, everything that we've done, for at least in my lifetime, right, has always been like largely centered about happening somewhere else,
That's
right?
True.
And very few things are on U.S. shores, right? Certainly not from a war perspective, but even any sort of like climactic, sort of adverse effect. Also, can we give a shout out to Julianne Moore?
Oh,
yes.
Laura can, yeah.
Can we just give a shout out? I just feel like we can't wrap this discussion up without
talking about. Okay, I'm really glad you brought it up because I was like, how can I bring up Julianne Moore? She's like my platonic ideal of beauty.
So Laura, okay, so tell us your top 5 favorite things about Julianne Moore.
No, I'm not going to do that.
No, she's great. She's great. I think she's great generally. I think I tend to like a lot of stuff that she's in. But pretty short turn in the movie, not too much screen time, but just like comes in, does her work. Like it's great. Establishes like emotional stakes for this, right? Yep. Like she's, I enjoyed her.
She's a pro.
I love her and everything. But I said the same thing where I was like, I forgot how quickly she dies in this movie. Yeah. Holy moly. Like we look at the timestamp. I'm like, there's so much more movie. I forgot about that. Like in my mind, she's a big part of it. But she just she leaves an impression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I love her.
To me, she anchors the emotional stakes, right? Before Theo realizes what's at stake here, I think Julianne Moore is like setting that tone and you get the little bit of a backstory about, they lost a child, right? Some things like that. So, no, I think she does a lot to pull, at least when I'm watching the movie, she pulls me in a lot, right? She gets me on board, right?
Danny Houston is amazing. But yeah, no, I just think he's got like 5 minutes of screen time and he uses them in Children of Men. He's great. That just wide stance he takes when he's standing underneath the David in his like I don't know what it is about those jeans that feel really early 2000s.
Gotta get the little acid wash.
I think it's like there's like they're overly like worn on the thighs and maybe just a little too flared.
Oh, the flare. Remember the flare, Vishal?
Yeah.
Like the boot cut.
You gotta get the boot cut.
That's what it is.
I had a couple of those.
And I think he's got like a Henley with like maybe a button undone. Like he's
Henley's
like
a power move.
this guy.
Any context to Henley's a power move.
I just think he's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, man. We should let you go. This was super fun. Thank you so much for coming on, Vishal. And we will have to have you back. To the listeners, I hope you enjoyed our episode on Children of Men. Rate, review, subscribe. I don't know why I say those things. Nobody's listening. It's fine. But yeah.
We still value this project, Justin.
It's about the process.
It's about the I feel like you guys are mocking me. Okay, so we're going to sign off now. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.